The field of archaeology was made famous through the filmed exploits of a man named Indiana Jones. But archaeology is alive and well in Dubuque and an integral part of the Upper Bee Branch Creek Restoration Project. In 2015 and 2016, archaeological digs have been conducted in the area where the creek is being daylighted. And today, we'll meet the archaeologist behind this work and learn why she's here and what she's found. I'm Kristen Hill, Communications Specialist for the Bee Branch Watershed Flood Mitigation Project. I'm joined today by Leah Rogers, Principal Investigator and part owner of Tallgrass Historians based in Iowa City. Leah is here to talk about the work she's been doing as part of the Upper Bee Branch Creek Restoration Project. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming today to talk to us.
Not a problem.
So to start, can you tell us a little bit about archaeology and your firm Tallgrass Historians and what kind of projects you typically work on?
Well, Tallgrass is a cultural resource management firm. We contract to do archaeology and architectural history and history. Most of our projects are DOT related. Somebody's building a road or replacing a bridge or something like that. As part of the environmental impact statement and assessment, you have to do cultural resource studies ahead of time so that you're not digging up something that's significant or encountering burials during construction and that sort of thing. But we also do National Register nominations and grant-funded studies as well.
Why is archaeology and doing this type of historical research and documentation so important?
Well, for historic in particular, people think everything's written down or we have photographs of everything or maps. And the reality is only a small part of our history is actually written down, and how people actually lived and what their homes look like and the how they use their yard space and what they ate and their health habits and their social habits. Those aren't written down anywhere. And so the archaeology is the only record of that. And so by excavating it and studying it, we learn all about the history of this area.
Okay. And when did you begin working with the City of Dubuque and on the Bee Branch project?
Well, I think it was about 2009. It's been a long time, but that was just the initial study, so we haven't actually been working continuously since then. It's been kind of off and on.
Okay. You said you've been working on the Bee Branch project since 2009, so what have you all been doing over the years?
Well, it started out with a real initial assessment study, and that was basically putting together all the documentary information, then trying to say, these are the areas we need to go look at if they're going to be impacted. That was written up in a report and submitted and reviewed. And then they came back and said, well, you need to do the subsequent studies, which is basically a phase 1, and then some of them went to a phase 2, where you had to do more testing to be sure that it was a significant site. And each stage along the way had a report that was written for it that then was reviewed. And then at the end, where they were ready to say, yes, we have this significant area, it's going to be impacted, we can't avoid it, so you have to go to data recovery, which is the mitigation of the adverse effect to the site. And the houses were documented before they were removed, and a lot of the material was salvaged for use elsewhere on historic projects in town. And the archaeology then, we had to come up with a data recovery plan, which is another document that had to go through review. And it's all these review stages that you have to go through in the process. And then there was even a point where what they call the area of potential effect was expanded, because they realized there might be some more areas that they needed as far as the construction project went. So we had to come back and kind of start over with phase 1 again. So it was a long process, a lot of coming back and forth, but then we finally got to the data recovery stage.
Okay. And then when did you start data recovery exactly?
That started just about this time last year in April of 2015. And we were literally right in front of the contractors because they started at the same time. So it was not the way I would have preferred it. It's not the way it's usually done. We usually are way ahead of the construction. But it's just the way it turned out with all the different moving parts that this project had and all the different approvals that they had to get and the changes that were made. That's how it ended up. And the contractors were very cooperative, and I think it all worked out well without us causing them too many difficulties and them causing us too many difficulties. And,
Good. It sounds like everyone was pretty flexible and made it work.
Yeah, we did.
That's great. And what type of research and planning have you done as part of this project?
Well, actually, Jim Jacobson, who's a historian out of Des Moines, did the initial historical context and background studies for this area. And he looked at property records and maps and photographs and census records and city directories and identified this one area that we're digging in as historically significant. And so then we were called in to look at the archaeology. And so that's how we got involved in it at that point.
Oh, so why was it considered historically important?
Well, initially it was the architecture of the homes that were here. It was a working class neighborhood, very heavily Catholic, kind of a mix, mainly German, but a mix of German and Irish and other groups. And it was even though it was, kind of an economically depressed area, the architecture was pretty well preserved as far as the historical integrity of it. And so it was identified for its architectural significance initially. And then we came in and did some testing where we just dug holes at specific locations to see how intact the yard areas were, whether there were intact privies and cisterns and wells that had substantial 19th century deposits in them. And once we found that the answer was yes, then we targeted those areas as also significant for the information that they could yield. And so that's how it evolved into doing an excavation.
So what does an archaeological dig look like? What kind of tools do you use? What does it all entail?
Well, initially, our initial study is just digging with shovels and handheld augers and just doing small test pits initially. But what we did this last summer was the full-scale excavation that most people think of when they think of an archaeological dig, where you open up a big wide area and excavate it in completely. And we actually used heavy machinery to open up the area. So we had a small skid loader and a small backhoe. And he was very good about, if I can say, Drew Cook and Sons, who do an excellent job, were the subcontractors. And they just came in and carefully, with their machinery, scraped off the overburden and exposed the features, which are the privies, the wells, the foundations, the cisterns. And then once they were exposed, then we went in and mapped it and then excavated it with hand tools like shovels and trowels. And we had big shaker screens set up. And
okay. Now, when you say you mapped it, how do you map it? Do you use technology or is it hand mapping?
Well,
what does that mean?
Some of it's the old-fashioned way where you just use the tape. But we had a total station out there too, so we had more of a high-tech level. So we had both.
Okay. So you did a lot of work this past summer,
yes,
in the summer of 2015.
Yes.
And so where did you work in the project area exactly?
Well, we started at Garfield. There was one lot that within the project area where the B branch is being daylighted that was actually had a Garfield Avenue address. We started there because they're working from from the lower end to the upper end of the B branch. And so that one needed to be done first. And then we just marched progressively towards East 22nd Street, which was where our excavations ended. That was kind of the end of the Romberg-Neist historic district that had been identified.
Okay. So what did you all find?
Well, lots and lots of privies. Okay. A lot more than I anticipated. As we got farther over towards East 22nd Street, some of those backyards had like 4 or 5 privies in it for each house, which was kind of surprising for an urban area. Usually they cleaned them out and continued to use them. So that almost got a little overwhelming because it was a little more than they thought. But we found cisterns and wells, stone foundations, brick foundations from houses and outbuildings and things like that.
Okay. So what other types of artifacts did you find? Like, do you find artifacts in the privies?
Oh,
and
yes.
Things, right? So what type of items do you find and what do they tell us?
Well, you have the actual night soil deposits themselves, as they call it, which is the human refuse. That actually is very rich in information because it has all the seeds, and you can also learn about what parasites people had, what their overall health was, because sometimes viruses can be identified. You find out what they were eating in particular. But in addition to that, they also use privies just to dump garbage in. Oh. And so everything in the household, they didn't have landfills back then, everything in the household sooner or later ended up in the privy. So you'll find anything, bottles, dishes, whole sets of dishes sometimes, utensils, smoking pipes, buttons, shoes.
Oh my gosh, so you
name
found
it.
all of that.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
then what do you do with it?
Well, right now we're in the process of cleaning it all up so we can analyze it. So we're still kind of in the early stages of that. But then we analyze it and we identify when it was manufactured, what it, like the bottles, what did they hold. You can learn a lot about the medicines that people were taking at the time, what their overall health was, as well as their social habits. We have found some religious associated artifacts like medallions, Catholic medallions, and things like that, which is not unsurprising in a Catholic neighborhood.
Yeah.
But where they were buying things, where things were coming from. We did find a lot of tokens from some of the local stores, including tokens. Tokens were usually metal money that had a value, but only at the store where you purchase things.
Okay.
And often it was for like 5 cents or 10 cents. We actually found tokens where you could redeem it for like a bushel of tomatoes, which I'd never really encountered that before, so that was kind of
almost like a
unexpected.
coupon.
Exactly.
Yeah. So do you know what those local stores were?
Well, one of them was and I'm going to forget the name. There used to be a grocery store on the corner right there in the project area.
Okay.
And some of those were for that store.
So I know there was a Weiss grocery, but probably not that long ago. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Sorry. I don't remember that
That's
one.
okay. I was just curious. Okay. And so then what happens when you find these structures or these artifacts? Like, did you know you were going to find the foundation you found? And what did you do, when you found it?
Well, some of them, we did have the Sanborn fire insurance maps, which would show in particular points in time where the buildings were located and where the privies were. However, it usually didn't show all of it because it was only certain years.
Okay.
And so there were foundations where we didn't expect to find foundations, and privies where I was surprised to find them. And not so unsurprised, we often found them right next to the well, which in this day and age you'd be horrified by that idea, but they had no idea of the connection between, the bacteria and the viruses in human waste and, their water supply. So some of these were like right side by side.
Oh my gosh. So what time period are these things from?
Most of it, that neighborhood was mainly the 1880s and on.
Okay.
So, and the houses were still being occupied until not that long ago. But the privies basically date into the early 1900s. After that, they all had city water and city sewage. So.
Sure. Would there have been anything you would have found that would significantly halted or stopped construction from happening?
About the only thing that would have is if we had encountered human remains.
Okay.
There's always that remote possibility anywhere that you're at, but even then, there is a mechanism in the state, a process that you go through to relocate, particularly if they were like historic burials. They would have been documented and relocated to an active cemetery. There's always that possibility of finding Native American remains. But luckily for this area, this wasn't really an area conducive for that kind of activity because it was a creek valley. Mm-hmm. And it's not where people would normally have buried their dead. But that was about the only thing that would have caused some difficulties.
Okay. So what was the most surprising thing you found or exciting thing you found?
Really oddly shaped privies. And I've never encountered a circular privy or an oval-shaped privy, but we found both of those out there. And they were all at one household, which was really, really odd. And the oval one was actually brick-lined, which, if you can imagine, the masonry that went into making a perfectly oval-shaped brick-lined privy, and what the structure above it must have looked like, because why would you dig an oval privy if a rectangular hole in the ground would have worked just fine with a square building? So
you can only imagine it would have been really nice above ground as well.
We had like 4 or 5 perfectly round ones as well. I don't know.
So you don't know what to attribute that to or why they might have done it? It's kind of a mystery still
Yeah,
at
we're
this
still
point?
doing research on whose house that was in particular and who they were and whether they were a Mason or I don't know.
Oh, so you might be able to
Yeah.
tell.
There's a possibility it has some kind of ethnic affiliation, but that's something we're still trying to research. So
Okay.
whether it was something they brought with them from the old country, I don't know. But
So you were talking about all this research you're going to be doing. So how long does it take you to do this research? And, when can we find out about the results?
well, we're supposed to be done at the end of the summer, so this summer in 2016. So madly working on it right now.
Okay, so how many people do you have working on the research?
Well, I have anywhere from 2 to 4 at any one point in time. Right now we're doing field work for other projects because it's the beginning of the field season. So
Yeah. So you talked about knowing what liquid was in the bottles or what their diets were like. So how do you tell what liquid were, in what bottles? If you just have a small piece of glass, or is it if you have the entire bottle is when you can tell? And, how do you do the research?
well, some of it's by bottle shape and bottle color. You just know that from people having done research on historic bottles through the years. But we have a lot of complete bottles that still have the labels on them. Some of them, there's a lot of them that have paper labels that are still intact. So
Oh my gosh, they say preserved for that long.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
pretty amazing. And so where do the artifacts go after you do your research?
Well, the city can keep any or all of them if they like. It's quite a number, so I imagine what they're going to want to do is either talk to some of the local museums or the library and see, if anybody does want an exhibit. Otherwise, they get reposed at the Office of the State Archaeologist in Iowa City. And even then, you could still get, like even on fairly permanent loan exhibits. Like if the library just wanted an exhibit and they didn't want to curate it forever,
They would be able
they could
to
do that. Yeah.
So how do they request, to do that?
Well, they would contact the Office of the State Archaeologist. They have
Okay.
John Cordell in their lab there that handles all the curation facilities. So.
Great. So when you do your research, is there a big report at the end that
Yes.
would be able to be made public in case anyone was, interested in finding out the information?
Sometimes archaeological reports are for, like our initial work is considered confidential because you don't want somebody to go out and loot a burial mound or an Indian site or something like that.
okay.
But since this is data recovery, meaning that, the sites are now destroyed because they've built the creek through it, I don't think there'd be any difficulty with it being a public document. So.
Okay. And do you have more work to do as part of the B Branch project?
Well, we just finished up our last bit of field work today, and that was they're deconstructing the sewer line, the old historic B Branch stone sewer between 22nd and 24th, and we've done our last bit of monitoring on that because at this point they're down to 22nd Street. So.
Okay. And when you say monitoring, what does that mean exactly?
Well, that's me standing there with the camera and my GPS and taking notes as they're actually taking out the sewer with heavy equipment. So,
Okay. So
we're not actually getting down, and we'd already had gotten down to the sewer years ago, but it's just there were certain areas we still had some questions about how they actually built the original sewer and where the original creek was while they were doing that. And so we've done some studies between 22nd and 24th to determine that location. So I think we got a pretty good handle on how they did it. So
Really? Can you go into details about
well,
how
it's
that might
a lot
have
like
happened?
they're doing it right now, where
Okay.
you build a diversion channel and you get the actual creek waters away from it. And what they did between 22nd and 24th is to use the original creek channel as that, kept the water going through there while they built the B Branch. And then they kind of converge at 22nd Street. And at that point, I think the original creek went off to the side, and then the B Branch went down Elm Street. So
Okay.
it was kind of what we expected, but got it confirmed. And then they backfilled the old creek channel with a lot of brick.
Really?
Which
Wow.
I'm still doing some research on to find out where all that brick came from, because that was a tremendous amount of brick. So something must have been torn down in this town about that time in the early 1900s. So
Okay. And so when you were down in the old storm sewer, it's actually it's an arch sewer, correct? Like old stone arch?
Yes.
Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And so you take pictures and just kind of document the status of what it looks like now?
Well, it was built in sections by different contractors, and our major question was, yeah, we had the conceptual plan drawings of how they were supposed to build it, and we had questions as to whether they, that there were differences between the builders and the time periods in which they were doing it, and basically they just, what we're finding is they followed the same plan all the way through it. So
they were really
it gets smaller, but yeah.
And then, did you do any work on the lower B branch before that was under construction?
Yeah, the whole project was divided into the two different segments. So yeah, we did archaeology to the phase 2 level down in the lower level. We just didn't find anything intact enough or significant enough in that area to warrant that further step. There was nothing considered significant in that area. So that's why that got built. That was scheduled to be built first anyway, but we didn't do any major data recovery in that area for that reason.
Okay. Was there anything else you can tell us about that project area and what you discovered through your archaeological dig? Anything about the people, or you said what they were eating? Have you done any of that research, and just in general?
No, that's still in the early stages, so that we don't know the answer to that yet. So later this summer we'll have those answers and all that research back. But
okay, well, very exciting. I'll be excited to hear what you find out through your research. And thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for watching City Channel Dubuque.